What's up, geeks and gamers? It's Odin coming back with a box office a breakdown for this past weekend, which sees The Flash doing abysmal at the box office, not only domestically, but also worldwide, only making $55 million domestic when the projections were between 70 and 75 for the 3-day, and only making $130 million when you add all of the numbers together worldwide, coming in a good $25 million below where the initial projections were, especially coming from Deadline. Right now, The Flash is looking to be a massive flop for Warner Brothers, which unfortunately for them has been kind of, the trend. They have been making a lot of these big budget movies to not make really any money back, and in fact to lose quite a bit of change. And so we'll talk about that and what the box office prospects look like for this movie. And we'll also give some updates here about some of the second weekend numbers for films like Transformers: Rise of the Beast. That film also set to be a flop at this point in time. And also for Disney's Elemental, which had an even worse opening weekend than this did. Both films, though, coming from massive studios that have now, for the last couple of years, really since COVID started, have struggled to be able to make the amount of monies they put into their films back in any type of way. And it's been really, really, again, it couldn't happen to nicer companies, we could say, but it's kind of insane that they're continuing to add and continuing to make these kinds of movies and spend the kind of money that they're spending, especially when they're not making anything back on it. But let's go ahead and dive into the domestic news first, starting off with the article over at Deadline. Says, there are a lot of lessons to be learned this weekend, but chief among them is that what it's like for a major motion picture studio to open a movie with largely a number of its cast, primarily its main star, not available to do press. Now, it sounds like to me he is trying to use this as some type of an excuse, try to say, oh, one of the reasons why the film may be not doing as well is because they're not doing a lot of press. Last I checked, a lot of people don't go to see the movies because they watched an interview. That typically is not a huge motivating factor for a huge portion of the population, right? Trailers have a much bigger impact. People will see a trailer and say, oh, this looks interesting. This does not look interesting whatsoever. And if we know anything about this movie, we know anything about the actual production cost and the marketing cost behind it, they have not been shy to spend a lot of money blitzing ads, blitzing trailers, blitzing all kinds of promos for it. And so to say that this is because the star of the movie and that several stars of the movie is not doing press, I get, or at least to imply as such, I think is quite disingenuous. It goes on to say, that was the big looming question, which was on everyone's minds in the wake of Ezra Miller's tabloid-laden 2020 to 2022 in regards to Warner Brothers DC's $200 million The Flash. Now, I just want to stop right there because allegedly $200 million, a lot of people out there speculate, and some even have sources that claim that the number is actually closer to $300 million. That would not surprise me whatsoever, especially since $200 million was likely the cost going into the actual making of this movie. But it's been many, many years that this film has been put on stall, has been put on delay, has been delayed by various things, including changing directors, reshooting various things too. And that seems to indicate that $200 million is kind of a joke at this point, as far as to be taken seriously as the actual production budget for this movie. However, of course, if you've actually seen the film, you know that especially when you look at that CGI, it doesn't seem like they spent really any money on it because it is objectively some of the worst CGI I've ever seen, especially when it comes to a movie that's cost this amount of money. So we take all that stuff into account, though, and I think it's easy for us to say that this movie probably cost a lot more than the $200 million that they are claiming. But I also don't like how Deadline is framing everything surrounding Ezra Miller. Now, again, I'm all about, and many of us are all about, the presumption of innocence, right? That you have to actually have the crimes be proven against you. But to try to basically label everything that's been going on with Ezra Miller as simply tabloid stuff and not actual credible allegations and not actual allegations that need to be investigated, that are being investigated, that are going to be tried, etc. Again, I think that's a bit disingenuous for them to actually do that. But hey, this movie coming in at $55 million, that's coming in below where the projections had been. So remember, going into the weekend, Deadline said 70 to 75 million. Yesterday, they had adjusted that to 60 million. It actually came in underneath the number that they thought it was going to be coming into. And not just that, but also they're expecting this to make less than $10 million on Juneteenth, tomorrow, right? This is a somewhat new national holiday here in the United States, and so therefore you'll have some people off from work, and you'll have some of the the federal jobs and federal places that will have tomorrow off. But in general, it's just a kind of insane thing to think about and to look at. Now, if you've seen the movie, it's not that insane because the movie is not very good, but when you're looking at these numbers, even just from the outside of it, it is just quite abysmal. Going into the actual numbers themselves, again, talking here also about Elemental, it's interesting how The Flash is pretty much getting all of the attention, but look at what's going on right now with the second place movie, Elemental. Here is the amazing thing. Look at Elemental versus Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. All right, Spider-Verse is going now into well past its second weekend. In fact, let me go ahead and see if I can get this to actually show that because it's important. So yeah, this is the third weekend for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. So this movie, in its third weekend, making $27.8 million, only a 50% drop, so having very strong holds domestically here, only came in slightly underneath where a brand new Disney Pixar movie came in. Again, a Disney Pixar movie. These movies used to be the cream of the crop. These are the films that used to bring in all of the families. What this is showing me is that Disney has lost the families. There's a myriad of reasons as to why that's the case. I personally think that a lot of it has to do with their getting involved in Florida politics, and all the videos that came out with them very clearly saying we're going to try to put this identity politics, this alphabet agenda into our movies. I think a lot of that had to do with why you had films like Lightyear, for instance, lose money. And look at every single kids movie that they have released since that time. They've just not been able to really have any type of standing power, of any type of hold whatsoever. And Disney should be very, very concerned because they spent $200 million on this movie. And based on this numbers right here, we thought Flash was going to be a major flop. Elemental is going to be an even bigger flop with this film not doing anything, only making $29.5 million, again, barely ahead of the third weekend numbers for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, which is very much seeing some very strong holds. But Flash came in with $55.1 million, $29.5 to Elemental. So very weak opening weekends for both of these movies. In fact, The Flash is coming in as one of the worst opening weekends for any DCEU movie ever. This is coming in well below the numbers that were made by a film like Black Adam last year. This is also even getting close to the territory of even films that were impacted by the pandemic. I mean, this film actually, when you look at the average ticket prices, because ticket prices back when Birds of Prey came out versus ticket prices today, this movie had barely more tickets than what Birds of Prey had. And Birds of Prey came out during the midst of the pandemic and had a lot of other issues going against it, in addition to it being a terrible movie. The fact that The Flash is having this when there is no pandemic, when there is no major theater crisis or theater shortage whatsoever, just goes to show you that this movie and this studio are in a lot of trouble. If no one, in my opinion, if no one is able to be fired from these two releases alone, because Warner Brothers, this is now, several releases in a row that you've had major loss of money. For Disney, it's been even more so at this point, especially in more recent history. If someone doesn't lose their job over this, I don't quite understand it. It sounds like the shareholders probably need to start standing up to this nonsense. Spider-Verse, though, dropping 50% to $27.8 million in its third week of release, still making quite a bit of money. Transformers, though, and this is something I predicted would happen this weekend, Transformers actually fell beneath in its second weekend, Spider-Verse's third weekend. So Spider-Verse making 27.8, Transformers dropping 67% to $20 million. So it's not even close in that comparison. So that is really, really bad for this movie. And that's the reason why this film is looking like it will be a box office flop, especially since internationally, yeah, it's doing okay, but it's not doing any type of numbers close to that of the original Transformers franchise. And it's, sad to see Michael Bay has kind of driven this franchise into the ground, because even though I've heard rather mixed things about this movie, it is sad that it almost has no chance whatsoever because of the aura that this franchise has because of the Michael Bay kind of driving everything into the ground. Little Mermaid coming in at the number 5 spot here, dropping another 50%. So some people might try to hold on to that's a pretty strong hold, right? You said it's a strong hold for Spider-Verse. Yeah, but for Spider-Verse, it's third week and it's had strong holds and a very strong opening weekend, where Little Mermaid has been underperforming in many markets, especially internationally. So this movie is set to still be a massive flop. Looking internationally for a moment, The Flash, $130 million opening weekend, so well below the $155 that was being projected by Deadline. Elemental, only $44.5 million internationally as of the recording of this video. This film, again, I do this metric where I've looked at films that I've been tracking since 2019 in my charting, and I just recently found out that if you actually take the average of the opening global weekend and compare it to the end result, typically most films on average will make around a third of their entire box office in their opening weekend. Talking here about, again, by the end of its run. So if that indeed holds for this film will be lucky if it breaks $133 million worldwide. So again, if this is going to be a third of its end total, you're looking around $133 million in total for this movie, based on a $200 million budget. Yeah, this film is in a lot of trouble and is set to be a massive financial failure. And just doing that also with The Flash, which again did better, but not by all that much. This film will be lucky if it even gets close to $400 million worldwide. And based on the fact that this film needs to make a minimum of $500 million, and some will have that break-even point a heck of a lot higher than that. I'm trying to be as generous as I can with those numbers, though. The fact that this film won't even get that bare minimum, that very generous, very conservative break-even point, yeah, this film is in a lot of trouble and is likely to be a massive flop. Elemental, though, much bigger flop in the long run. Spider-Verse, though, is getting very close to $500 million worldwide, doing very well, especially on a $100 million budget. That's a big factor there. Rise of the Beast at $274 million worldwide, again, is set to be a financial failure. Little Mermaid is looking like it is trending towards maybe being able to cross $500 million worldwide, but remember that is still well below even the bare minimum that this film needs to make to break even. $250 million means a bare minimum break even is around $625. So this film is barely going to get to $500 million. That's still $125 million less than its bare minimum break even. And if you do the math on that, you're looking at yet another. You have two films right now coming from Disney that are set to be $100+ million flops. And even though films like Guardians have been able to make some profit, it's not nearly enough to make up two films losing north of $100 million. Looking at the actual charting there to end the video for today, we look at Rise of the Beast. Based on the 274 worldwide number, I can make some projections. So again, based on his typical historical standards, how most films do, the film likely will make somewhere between around $400 million or so to about $450 million would be my guess worldwide. If we see the film continue to have massive drops, that obviously becomes a lot harder to even get $400 million. But its break-even point is roughly $500 million, which means this film is very much likely going to flop. As you can see, it's going to lose anywhere between 64 and make around 29 million. But if you're making this amount of money, and this would be a best case scenario, this would have to double the amount of money it's made so far. And with the 68% drop domestically, that is just not going to happen, especially with more and more films set to come out over the coming weeks. So right now it's sitting around 135 million in the red. Remember, 2.5 times the budget is typically the break-even point. This film only at 1.4. So very different than Spider-Verse, which is at 4.9 times its budget. So that's why that film is making quite a bit of profit at this point in time. But also why films like Transformers at 1.4 is likely going to lose. The Boogeyman even as well, a smaller budget film, also set to still lose money at this point in time. But also look at these numbers here for Elemental and The Flash versus its budget. Elemental has only made 0.2 times its budget, whereas The Flash has only made 0.6 times its budget. And that's the reason why you're going to see, and it wouldn't surprise me if these films end up being not only the biggest box office bombs of the year, but also very similar in their losses, especially when you take into account The Flash likely costing a heck of a lot more than the $200 million that they have been actually reporting. But these are the numbers as they currently stand. What are y'all's thoughts about it? Have you seen Elemental or The Flash? I have seen The Flash. It's not a very good movie. I was very kind in my review towards the film because there are definitely some things in there that I did enjoy, but especially when it comes to CGI, and y'all know how much of a stickler I am for CGI, it was just, it was so embarrassingly bad that it's hard to really get past that, especially when it is very prominent from the very beginning with some terrible CGI babies. But let me know your thoughts about this and anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, leave the 5 out of honestly, whatever it is that you're watching us, please make sure to smash it. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed Sunday, and as always, God bless.